Good morning, Doug and Grant. Where are you both zooming in from?
I'm in Northern California. Nice to be here.
Doug?
I'm in New Hampshire. I'm in rural New Hampshire.
And I'm down in the other corner in San Diego, California. So thanks everyone for joining. Doug, Grant, you've been a customer of Kentik for a couple of years now, correct?
Yeah, that's right. So we've been a big fan of Kentik and everything that it's let us do from a network intelligence standpoint. So thanks for everything that you guys do.
Thank you for joining us today. Really appreciate your support. So let's jump right into it. Today we're going to cover Kentik Market Intelligence, what it is, and Doug's going to share some observations and a demo of KMI. We're also going to go over some recent outages, particularly the big outage from Rogers Communications back in July, I think it was, early July, and an upgrade on Russia and Ukraine. And then Brian is going to talk about Unitas Global and also how they're using Kentik. And one of the ways that we're particularly interested in and we'll give a live view of is how they're using Kentik synthetics to generate some customer transparency on the status of their network. I'll give you a couple of slides on Kentik at the end, and we'll also have time for Q&A at the end. We may also just stop briefly after Doug goes through Kentik Market Intelligence to have some questions after that in case anyone wants us to dig in anywhere in particular. So with that being said, let's jump into KMI. So we launched KMI earlier this year to enable Kentik customers to easily navigate rankings and insights of the global routing table. For our customers' marketing organizations, KMI serves as a neutral party to rank ASs in various markets. You can see it as being able to establish a claim in terms of the number of customers you have, or something you can use as a third-party claim in terms of how your market leadership in particular markets. For sales teams, for our customer sales teams, that can help with sales prospecting and goal setting by helping find future customers in specific markets. KMI will actually highlight any single homed networks in a market where you operate, which obviously represents sales opportunities. If you've got competitors who have single home customers. We'll also identify upstream providers of any network and track competitors in any market in terms of who's gaining, who's losing when they add customers. For network planners and peering coordinators, KMI provides a data-driven approach to network planning by helping determine the top retail, wholesale, or backbone providers in any country, and by identifying upstreams and peers that will help interconnection specialists make better decisions. So now we're going to go to a demo, and Doug, you can just take over the sharing of your screen to do that demo.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is just the landing page for Kentik. I was going to take you through to how do you find Kentik Market Intelligence, our new product earlier this year. There's a little menu in the top right, and as you log into KMI, you get into you see a view like this where we're ranking the top backbone providers of the world. This is the biggest customer cones that we're tracking through, and this is their rankings through the past year. The tool has got a bunch of different dimensions that it can operate in. So one is we can flip between the V4 and V6 internets. These are completely different routing tables. So then the rankings, all the relationships end up being different. A lot of them are different. There's a geo restriction you can add where you can just look at particular areas of the world. Obviously, that's going to be pretty key when you're looking at rankings or just trying to zero in on one particular market. And then there is a this notion of different types of customer base or customer score. So in the view we're looking at now, this is the all customer type all. This is the entire customer cone. So for those familiar with this concept, an AS has got a handful of AS customers, which in turn also have customers, and you end up with this increasing size of a cone. We're basically gathering up all the prefixes that are transited in that cone. Each prefix gets a score, and then as it gets propagated, as it gets transited, the AS that's transiting it gets a numeric score, and that gets added up. So right now what we're seeing is for the total customer cones, Telia on top, Cogent, Lumen, the same usual suspects if you've been in the space for a while, and this is a pretty stable ranking. V6 is a little more erratic, and then there's Hurricane Electric's on top just due to their corporate network strategy, and then it gets a little more dicey in the V6 world. But why don't we? So the rankings are one piece, and there's only a handful of people who can claim to be in the top 10 globally for V4. But why don't we look at a couple of other? How would you use this and these use cases that Steve went through? So we're going to talk about a certain outage that took place last. Let's see if I can get that. Last month, and yeah, let's see. So we want to look at specifically Rogers. If we were to bring that up, and how would we view Rogers here? So the landing page is intended to compare the stats around your AS to the one you're looking at. In this case, Kentik isn't really a transit provider, so those are empty. But if we look at the this section here with customers and providers, what's happening is in the background is that we are taking every AS adjacency and doing a classification on it and figuring out who is providing service to whom. And so in this case, on the left, on the bottom, we see that Rogers primarily gets its transit from Tata and Lumen, and a little bit from another, actually a subsidiary AS that may look like an error, but this is not. In fact, in my write-up of the outage, this was Rogers uses this network as a conduit to reach some of its competitors. If we click on it and navigate over to its profile, we can see that it's getting service from the competitors, Bell Canada, TELUS, Beanfield, and this was actually a piece of Rogers that stayed up during the outage, but not enough to make a difference. But that's where that comes from. And then the list of customers, these are all the ASs we see as receiving transit services from Rogers. We're highlighting any that are single-homed. The reason being is that that's for sales folks that are using this. In the case of this one that I've highlighted, this 3602, that's a Rogers subsidiary that's configured as a transit customer. A salesperson from a competitor of Rogers is unlikely to get unlikely to score a sale there, but maybe the government of Quebec, which is presently singly homed to Rogers, someone else could come in and make the argument that, well, you guys are big enough and important enough that you ought to have more than one, especially given the outage last month, more than one transit provider, provided that can be accomplished in the monopolistic environment of Canada. So anyway, so single home, you can just look at, I only want to look at who are their single home customers. The advantage here is that if you would be able to, in theory, make the case that these guys ought to have a second transit provider without having to displace their current one. So that's one use case. Another one is that for any of these, pick another Royal Bank of Canada. One thing that's in the works, in a previous version of this type of tool, we would annotate these things with dates, these transit relationships with dates, and contracts are typically written in 12-month increments. And so when you're coming up on the anniversary, that's a good time for the sales folks to time when they're going to come and say, give them your best deal. Anyway, so that is some of the prospecting. The marketing comes from ranking. So there's enough subcategories within this product that you're probably number one in something, because every network grew out of some home turf. And if you can isolate that in the product, you can kind of find somewhere where you're strong, add that to your marketing. We've got Unitas as well on the call. So we can just for a moment take a look at what they look like. Grants company. In this case, we expand this to global. I don't care about the comparison, but this is an international company. You see like PLTT out of the Philippines, and HTC, Hong Kong, Bharti Airtel, India, KDI, Japan. This is a very international set of providers, and then these are who we're seeing presently as their AS level customers. There's a lot of internet in here, and I only recently learned that internet was acquired by Unitas a couple months ago, so congrats to them. But that's why they show up as a customer. A lot of times subsidiaries will be configured as essentially a transit customer, a captive audience, and that's how it'll appear in this product. Right, so we've gone over some of the sales prospecting, some of the marketing uses, and then lastly, the last feature that's coming out this quarter is a news thing where you get alerted on changes. And so you would subscribe to different markets, the market being a country or a subcontinent that you care about, networks that you care about, and then you would be receiving at a certain frequency any updates we see. So these networks gained a transit provider or lost a customer, or something happened in this market. You can tally those up and have those report to you. Some of the network architects that have used this kind of functionality in the past would use this to watch themselves. And if we ever reported on a change that was different than what they understood their own network to be, they would usually write back to me and be like, explain this. And it often ended up being some sort of routing misconfiguration. I'd say 9 times out of 10, that was how we identified some sort of a misconfiguration. So a lot of different roles can make use of this tool, and we're really excited about it.
Doug, was there any that you reached out to registrants and asked if anyone wanted you to dig into anything in particular? Did you get any responses on that?
Yeah, not on this.
Mm.
No, I mean, it's a newer. Give it time. Give it time. Yeah, another piece to this is looking at this longitudinally. And we'll look at a later slide where I do this in Ukraine. A lot of these stats, we're looking at a snapshot in time. This is updated every 6 hours. It's not really an operational thing, like it's not real time. So that frequency of update is more of a strategic kind of a tool. But having said that, when you look at it, like let's look at the last 6 months of any of this stats. It actually is pretty neat to see the temporal dynamics get revealed when we look at this over time. So I'll be doing this by hand, but we're going to integrate that into the product as well.
Thanks, Doug.
You bet.
Does anyone have any questions? Not seeing any here in the chat window, so if not, we'll move on to Grant. We're going on to an outage analysis, Doug, so this one's over to you.
All right.
Do you want me to put the arm sharing the screen? Right. There you go.
Yes, please. Okay. So yeah, the big one there's been a number of outages this year, starting with Tonga, some of the outages with Ukraine, but this is the latest big one. This catastrophic outage knocking out service for about 25% of Canada's population. We saw this beginning at 8:44 UTC on July 8th. Rogers went dark, just everything, the fixed line, mobile, everything down for, I'm using the term 16 hours is when the traffic seemed to arrive at where it was roughly, but there were reports that people were still down in pockets in different localized areas for multiple days. And I think this is getting regarded as Canada's largest internet outage in history. There were a lot of impacts here. We had a lot of critical services were running across Rogers. For those who don't know the Canadian market space, there are kind of different fiefdoms of the major telecoms, and they kind of, for the areas that they operate in, they are everything. They provide almost all the service. And so when Rogers went down, it took down 911 services. It affected hospitals. A lot of people couldn't use point of sale banking. Card swipes, so it was a cash only environment. And Steve, there was one other impact here. We saw then even the weekend had to cancel his show at the Rogers Center, ironically enough, due to this outage in Toronto, his hometown. So when this came out, so we put out a graphic along these lines. This is a view of our aggregate net flow. So we get net flow from many of our customers, very large amounts, and then we can use this in aggregate to tell stories about what our customers saw as far as their traffic going, in this case, to Rogers, specifically AS 812. We saw it go to almost zero, not completely zero, but essentially zero, and then there's some long jagged period of restoration. We can see V6 took a few more hours than V4 for what that's worth. It just had to do with the their architecture here. But if you want any more details, there's a link here. We'll add that in the description, or you can Google it and find our the write-up I did on this. If you go to the next slide here. So specifically, what we so Rogers filed an explanation that was published on July 22nd. More or less what they said was they had pushed out a configuration change that removed a filter allowing routes from the internet, so probably the global routing table, to get circulated in their interior gateway protocol. And so usually you have one protocol running inside your network that is figuring out how to route traffic within your network. That's your IGP. BGP, typically when we refer to it, we're referring to the exterior, like between ASs. And so they leaked everything into the interior gateway protocol. This led to an update flood that exceeded the memory and processing capacity of the routers. These things started keeling over. We started seeing routing withdrawals at different periods of time and pockets, possibly as these different routers were falling over. We did see, like as I and others were looking into this outage as it was unfolding, there were some initial assessments that are still kind of kicking around. The problem was that 812 had withdrawn its routes from the global routing table, and that it became unreachable as a result. And that is not a true statement. So we, as we kind of pulled this up, I could see that there were many routes that were up, but the routes being up wasn't enough. It's a necessary but insufficient criteria for communication. So there's the glue between their external routing and their internal routing had come undone, and the routes could be up and they're still not communicating. It wouldn't completely explain to me from the outside what was happening, but that was an important point that I wanted to add to this discussion. So I mentioned earlier on the KMI demo, there were a handful of routes that stayed up going through that 19832 AS of Rogers through some of their competitors. Again, not enough to make a difference here. This was a pretty catastrophic outage. And so I concluded that write-up with a bit of a soapbox. So I'm a BGP analyst now for 13 years, and every time there's an outage like this, whether it's Cloudflare had one in June and the Facebook outage in the fall, we as analysts can see a lot of the impacts in routing, and so we'll look at what routes were withdrawn, and it leads to some people saying like, oh, this BGP thing, we got to get a replacement for it because look, it's causing another outage, and I just here to say that's just not the case. BGP actually serves us well. It's remarkable how well it's operated over the last couple of decades of the internet. It doesn't need there's issues that are being addressed, mostly security wise. But if you tell it to withdraw a route, it'll do so. In this particular case of Rogers, our um, observing the withdrawals of BGP was a symptom, but as I mentioned earlier, it wasn't the cause of the lack of connectivity. 812 never left the global routing table, contrary to some reports. It just wasn't communicating anymore, again, due to this internal interior gateway protocol flood. Anyway, for more information, you can take a look at Rogers' report, which is somewhat redacted. You have to kind of read between black lines, and then my write-up, or you can always ping me, and I can happy to answer any further questions. Shall we move on, Steve?
Yep.
All right. So the next thing, I've been in the process of covering the internet impacts of the war in Ukraine since it kicked off in the end of February. And so we're into month 6 now of this conflict, and there doesn't seem to be any end in sight. The latest development was there's a city, Kherson, in southern Ukraine, just north of Crimea, that has been Russian held for the last couple of months, and they have taken the Russians have forcibly required all the ISPs to change how they connect to the global internet, now to connecting through the Crimea, specifically through Miranda Media, which is the Rostelecom. Rostelecom is a state telecom of Russia, and Rostelecom has a local agent in Crimea that does their service, and that's called Miranda Media, and that's AS 201776. And so there was an outage at the beginning of May in Kherson, where a couple of providers switched over to Miranda Media temporarily, and then reverted back. And then at the end of May, it was a complete switch over. And Steve, you click a little animation here. I've been discussing this with the New York Times, and hopefully in the next week there'll be a much snazzier publication of some of these stats. But this is the reconfiguration that we're seeing. So this first view of the May 30th, you've got many providers in Kherson with multiple transit providers are using. Most of these are national Ukrainian networks that connect on out to the internet. It is normal that a provider would have, an ISP would have multiple transit providers. In the event that one went down, you'd have some resilience there. Also, there's some business leverage. You'd like to be able. There's a cost to these, and if you have multiple, you can kind of play one off the other. It puts you in a position of power to. It gives you a little bit of leverage over your transit providers as far as costs go. The configuration they've gone to, that's really unchanged since the beginning of June, is that they're exclusively going through this one carrier in Crimea that offers no resilience. I'm gonna guess however they're charging, this is getting dictated to them, the terms. So it's something we saw similar to the rewiring of Crimea when that was annexed in March of 2014. That's when Miranda Media came on the scene. They built a submarine cable that I was the one that called active in July 2014. And we saw over the course of that year, almost all the providers then switching over to Russian transit, specifically Miranda Media. So we'll be following this, and this graphic on the right, I mentioned earlier that we looked at the scores and the stats around transit for a network. You can look at it for customer scores as well, but this is actually a temporal view of what was transit for this AS 47598, which is Kherson Telecom. The retail name is Skynet, and how that changed over time. It was pretty stable until the war started, and then we see this in all the graphs for this region. There's a lot of instability, and then now they're beholden behind Miranda Media. That's the latest from Ukraine, Steve.
Doug, just to jump in quickly with a question that was, I think, KMI related, but
Okay.
are we seeing anything in terms of customer base shift with what happened in Rogers outage?
That's a terrific question, and we have a tool that answer the question. I don't know the answer, but maybe I can look, and by the end of this talk, I'll. But I love that question. I haven't looked. So let me see if I can see an impact.
Yeah, maybe a little early for customers to
Maybe
but
they wish they could change. I mean, the thing is that the complaint about Canada, again, I mentioned, is a monopolistic environment. So if you don't like Rogers, you don't have another option. But I guess there could be some people on the fringe that are within the two markets that might be able to switch. But I like that question. Let me see if I can look.
okay. Let's hand over to Grant now. So, Grant, here's your first slide. Is that showing?
It sure is. Thanks, Steve. So I have this just as a little bit of context to explain kind of what Unitas does before I get into how we use Kentik. But fundamentally, we are an access provider. We do operate a global network. We're very enterprise focused. So our customers, unlike the Rogers example, right? We don't have residential customers, things like that. They tend to be multinational enterprise, and they tend to have fairly complex connectivity requirements, consisting of internet, cloud, last mile access by layer 2 Ethernet, and interconnections into the major cloud providers. So we have a multi-service network, and we provide multi-service access into buildings. But the biggest component of that is our global internet backbone, and Kentik is a big part of how we kind of monitor, manage, and support that. So if you go to the next slide, this is what our kind of network footprint looks like on a global basis. And as Doug alluded to, we just acquired the network business of INAP, formerly Internap. I'm very excited about that. One of the things that INAP does that is near and dear to our hearts is this kind of route optimizer technology called Miro that actually looks at the performance characteristics on a prefix by prefix basis in the routing table. And so it looks at things like packet loss, latency, and jitter, and then tries to make BGP a little more intelligent and performance aware. And so that's something that we are integrating into the Unitas core network. And one of the things that we're kind of exploring is how can we combine the data that we get from Kentik and use that really to enrich what that Miro platform does. And so the combination of the two, there's 170 points of presence and 1,100 customers. But in all of these markets that you see on the screen here, we have a very large amount of interconnection with other networks. So while compared to some of the providers in the market intelligence in the top 10, we're much smaller. But the traffic that we serve is very high value in nature to our clients, and so we rely on peering with local networks very extensively. So there's over 5,500 other networks that we interconnect with around the world. I think Doug saw some of that in the variety of providers that came up in the market analysis. But that's what drives performance for our customers. And so one of the things that as we looked to start integrating the INAP network into the Unitas backbone, we had to understand where traffic is coming from and going to on INAP, but kind of match that up to the network that Unitas operates. And as it happened, both INAP and Unitas were Kentik customers before this merger. And that's played a huge part in how we've put the networks together, because we had a common set of tooling that helps us understand our traffic profile. We've been able to look at our statistics in aggregate and actually have a much more predictable way of integrating the networks. There are transit networks out there that have merged as companies over the years. Thinking about a couple of very large ones headquartered in Colorado, that still operate as separate ASNs now going on 10 years later, or at least have remnants of those. And I think a large part of that is that commonly in an integration like this, we would overbuild and then shift traffic and hope things work. And because both networks were using Kentik before, it's enabled us to have a much more predictable experience as we put them together. And I think Kentik will play a really big part in enabling us to get to a fully integrated network a whole lot faster than is common in the industry. The other thing, so we use Kentik synthetics, and Doug, maybe if you want to pull up the that stats website, that would be great. It's yeah, there it is. I see it in the tab. So we use Kentik synthetics, which is not a traditional part of kind of flow analytics. We have a private agent server deployed in almost all of our metro markets around the world, and that synthetics agent does tests to popular internet destinations, so SaaS providers and Google name servers and things like that. But more importantly, it tests in a full mesh topology to all of the rest of the metro markets on the backbone. And this kind of gives us a couple things. One, it gives us a baseline for performance. We created this public front end that Doug's showing you now, so that anybody can go to this website. It's public, and you can see what performance characteristics look like between any two markets on our network. But it also serves as an early warning system. So a lot of times we'll see outages or other kind of topological events at the physical layer manifest themselves in terms of changes to performance on particular routes. There was a fairly large fiber cut onshore in Egypt that impacted 3 different cable systems. And this was just in the last couple of months. And what happened was that because of the importance of those cable systems, latency and packet loss from Europe to the Middle East and through to Asia were pretty significantly impacted across a lot of different providers. Now, fortunately, it wasn't an undersea cut, so it was restored quickly, and then the impact was mitigated pretty quickly. But this view actually gave us an early warning that something significant had happened, significant enough to impact multiple networks, going between specific regions, and we kind of knew about that and were able to route around it, I think, before a lot of other networks were able to respond. So it's very, very useful to have agents in the network that are monitoring performance characteristics kind of separate from the flow data.
So your customers can use this, Grant, as a place to go to if they're having performance issues. They can come here and see if there's any issues going on within the Unitas network, and it's a first place for them to go to determine whether it's the network or whether it's something else going on. Is that fair enough?
That's exactly right. Yeah, we have a lot of customers. This gets pretty well trafficked, so I know that we've had it out for about a year, and I know that as I kind of watch the traffic statistics every now and then, and every month there are more people that are hitting this. I'm pretty sure a few have it up on a screen somewhere in an office.
Yeah. So this is a view that's open to the public, not just your customers. I don't know why non-customers would be interested, but you can obviously use this to market to future customers as well, saying because this is a differentiator for you, right? I mean, I'm not sure how many other providers have a live view of the status of their network.
Yeah, our sales team loves this because they were used to having a potential customer say, well, what's your latency from Johannesburg to Hong Kong? And they'd have to have an engineer go and do a test. And now they can just pull this up and see exactly what it is. So it's been a great tool for the sales team as well. And I would say, there are lots of non-customers that see this. I know that during that cable cut, it was linked to from a number of media sources. But just to be clear, the data here comes from via the Kentik API that sits in front of those private agents, right? So we're just kind of wrapping that, but it's really the synthetic agents that are doing the work. And we present a more detailed view of this in the My Kentik portal to our customers.
Right. Yeah, it's one of the our synthetics platform has a really unique ability to do high density mesh testing views like this, no matter what the parameters are, and it can generate these reports in a minute. Okay, so is there anything else you wanted to talk about, Doug? Because we're close to wrapping up. We've gone for 40 minutes, which I think is what we were planning on. That's a coincidence.
So Grant mentioned the outage in Egypt, and so I had written up a blog post on that. I put it in our Zoom chat. I don't know if there's another place you can post it, or someone can Google it and find out. But we saw that as well, and then I kind of went into in the blog post, just we can see the impact between cloud regions. So everybody uses the same submarine cables. There's not a separate infrastructure. We all, no matter who you are, Google, Amazon, everybody's got to use the same subsea cables. And when there's an outage that knocks out a bunch of submarine cable connectivity, everybody gets affected. And so I wrote something up, including a little bit of the history of issues surrounding Egypt as a choke point on the internet, aside from being a shipping choke point. Let's see. So I did look into the Rogers thing. We're not seeing much change as far as market share within Canada. I'll keep poking around, but it may be too soon to see any impacts. I'll have to look into that. There was I saw in the chat. There's also a comment about or a question about the hijack. There was a BGP hijack in the past week of an Apple prefix by Rostelecom, State Telecom of Russia. And so with all the stuff going on these days, we're pretty concerned about this. I don't know exactly why this took place. The main theory that's out there now is that there is a 1-digit difference from a Russian route. And so maybe this is just a fat finger. I'm not sure what the objective would be. I would say that because what Rostelecom announced was more specific, there was no, Apple does not sign routes in RPKI, so there's no hope of that helping out. It would have helped in this scenario, but it didn't help because they didn't create any ROAs for the routes. Then that more specific was global, meaning that there's no way you can do kind of a man in the middle because you haven't left a clean path out to Apple to receive the other end of the traffic. So they would be receiving all of it, anything going to this one range, and probably black holing it. I check our flow, and we don't see a lot of traffic going to that prefix. So I'm not sure what gets hosted there. In about 5 hours after the Rostelecom started announcing the route, Apple announced 4 more specific covering the address space, so they deaggregated and announced those. So at that point, Apple then was in control of the address space again, and then a couple hours later, Rostelecom took down their route. Anyway, so that's what happened there. I don't know the practical impact of that incident, but would have been better had Apple created ROAs. I'm not quite sure what their reservation is on that. Maybe they've written that up somewhere.
So I've got 2 questions in here. I think one, Doug's asking if Apple had signed their routes, how much would that have mitigated the hijack?
Yeah, so there was on Twitter there was a thread. I should make a blog post just describing this, kind of how you would approach this question, because it's apples. It's hard to get apples to apples of if someone announces something in one part of the internet versus another, how much is RP going to help? I would say that now that we have the majority of tier 1s dropping invalids, you can expect about a 2/3 reduction in propagation if you, for a route that's RPKI invalid. And so it's not going to go to zero, but it's going to be greatly reduced. And so all that helps. Every bit helps, but it's significant now, and that's only a recent thing in the last couple of years with the tier ones dropping invalids. And you can take the whole routing table and look at how, what's the propagation, how many like route views peers see each route, and then separate them out by, are they invalid or unknown slash no valid. And you would see two populations separate out, and there'd be one, the globally routed routes that are fine, and then those that are invalid, it gets restricted quite a bit. And that ought to be common knowledge. That isn't today, but it should be.
Yep, Doug would love a post on that.
Yeah, that's my list. No, like same thing that we did in February in Nanog, of just like, hey, we've made a lot of progress in this. We're never going to get to 100%, but we've made enough to make a difference. And so right now, the analysis that I presented Nanog in Austin was that it was safe to say that the majority of the traffic, probably any of you on your networks are pushing, are going to routes that have signed ROAs. That's because a lot of the content providers are signing. A lot of the access networks are creating ROAs. That means if you're checking invalids, you're going to protect your traffic that's egressing, because you're not going to accept the Ross Telecom version of Apple. You're going to accept Apple had they signed it. You would be immune to getting your traffic misdirected. So it's in your interest. It's at a point where it's in your interest to be dropping invalids, and it's making a difference now, and that's recent. That's just in the last couple of years.
Doug Snoon's asking us to jump back into KMI and show a particular state in North America, like Colorado.
Let's see the tool. Yeah, we do. I don't know that. I guess. Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think it goes down to states. Let me see. North America. At some point you start to run into the limitations of. Yeah, you can drill down into states. I guess at the moment yeah, so I can share that if you want to see what that looks like.
I think getting that granular with BGP data would be pretty
Yeah,
error prone.
Yes, it is. It is. It is something that bugs me. But you take these things with a grain of salt once you start to really get slicing the cheese very thin on data that if we were Facebook or Google, we would have killer geo because we're basically all knowing beings. But in since we're not, one of the things that on geo's been something that I worked on for many years at Renesas, at Dyn, and Oracle, and we're coming up with techniques of how to improve geolocation. The commercial service providers for geolocation are not great. I mean, they're so-so, but once you start to get into this level of detail, they're not. They drop off real fast, and there's nobody that's very good. So we had to do a lot of stuff in-house. We have only recently in Kentik built our own mechanism to create our own local overrides, so we can make. Because prior to that we had to use our geolocation service provider and request them to make a change. Weeks later they might do it, and then it would finally trickle down to us plus all their customers, and so you want to get out of the business of doing that. We can fix it right now. We're going to fix it right now to ourselves, but right now geo is a work in progress. Hope that.
So but there are regional views as well, which
that's right. So that's not for every country. In the United States, we are breaking down by you can see like by U.S. Northwest, Mid Atlantic, New England, New York. So you can start to look at who are the you rank people in these different regions, and then also you could take one of the ASs and just restrict the view to the geo that you care about. Let's see. Yeah, so I don't know. I mean, that was a bad choice. It's kind of a little boring, I guess. But anyway, so all that's possible. Again, we're working on the geo. It's a known thing something that everybody struggles with. It's not just us.
Okay, are there any more questions? Last call. I do have a question here. With the news feed, would ISPs turning up pops within a new metro show up?
The new for KMI, this is strictly about adjacencies and let's see, and markets. So if an AS was suddenly originating or transiting address space in a new market, then that would be considered a news item or an insight, I think is what we're going to call it in this product, and so that would be reported. Again, subject to accurate geo, but it would get reported in this.
Okay. Well, here's a couple of references for everyone who's tuned in. Thank you. There's the URL to Unitas's global network status. If you want to find out more information about KMI, there's a blog that was posted by Doug on February 10th on the KMI website. And we do keep an updated view of all of Doug's posts on outages, and that's the URL for that.
You mind sharing your screen? I don't think the screen has been shared.
I'm sorry.
Perfect.
Okay, thanks. So there's that information there. You will get a recording of this webinar, which will have all of this information in it. If you do need to contact anyone here, there's people's Twitter handles, and any follow-up questions you have, you can email webinars@kentik.com. As I mentioned at the outset, this is first in a series of network operator confidential webinars we plan to host with having various network operators join us and Doug sharing some insights. So we hope to have those every 3 or 4 months, but we'll get a regular cadence going. Really thank everyone for attending. We're very happy with the number of people who registered, so we're very optimistic we'll keep this series going. Thanks again, everyone, for tuning in, and please email any questions later.